Welcome back to Gospel Applied, where we're talking about how the gospel we sing about on Sunday connects to real life that we live on Monday. This session represents a shift in what you're going to be talking about in your multiply groups. We're moving out of the rhythm about fellowship with God, where we talked about intimacy with Jesus and time in the Word and journaling and those types of things, to a new rhythm called fighting for holiness. And this is where you're going to be talking more and more about what it means to walk in the holiness and righteousness of the Lord. What does it look like to live out your faith at a practical level in your behavior, in your morality, in the way you carry yourself? But what I want you to understand is the reason we've ordered these rhythms the way we have is because we believe intimacy with Jesus precedes walking with Him. We don't want to call you to a life of fighting for holiness that's birthed out of duty or obligation or burden. We want the intimacy you have with Jesus to fuel what you're doing in your walk with the Lord. And so this video today, we're going to be talking about the difference between walking by faith and walking by fear. We want to talk today about what it looks like to walk by faith as we fight for holiness in our lives. Galatians 2:20 says this: I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Galatians 2:20 says that because we've been crucified with Christ, because we're united to Jesus by faith, we live and walk our lives by faith. We live our lives by faith. Now, faith is an important concept, but it's one that oftentimes we use as a word, but we really don't define. Faith has two key ideas. On the one hand, faith means acceptance of the truth. Faith means that intellectually I'm agreeing with the truth about who Jesus is and what He's done for me. So, for example, in Matthew chapter 11, John the Baptist sends people to Jesus to ask if He's really the Messiah. Are you really the one that we should be looking for, or is there another? Listen to what Jesus said. Jesus replied to them. This is Matthew 11:4. Go and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, those with leprosy are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised, and the poor are told the good news. And blessed is the one who isn't offended by me. So Jesus' answer to John about whether he's the Messiah or not is to list off the miracles he's performing. And he expects John to accept the truthfulness of those things and thus accept that he is the Messiah. So on the one hand, faith is saying, I accept or I agree with a statement of truth. But secondly, faith is also reliance on the truth. It's an experiential reliance on what Jesus has done for me, that I'm going all in on Jesus. So this shows up in Matthew 14, just a few chapters later, when Jesus is walking on water, and Peter says, can I come? And he comes out of the boat. And you remember the story? Peter begins to sink. Jesus comes over and saves him. And do you remember what Jesus said? In Matthew 14, verse 31, listen to what he says. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand, caught hold of him, and said to him, You of little faith, why did you doubt? What Jesus was talking about was not an intellectual agreement with facts on the water. He was saying, Peter, why didn't you rely on me? Why didn't you depend on me that I could actually make you keep walking on the water in that miraculous way? But there's a different kind of way we can live our lives. Oftentimes, instead of living by faith, it's very easy to live by fear. Now, normally when we say the word fear, we think about somebody who's scared at a haunted house or somebody that's trembling during a scary movie. But fear at a basic level is reliance on self. Fear is when you and I, instead of relying on Jesus and depending on Him, look inwardly for strength that we need to get through the day. Listen to 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. He says, Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time He may exalt you, casting all your cares on Him, because He cares about you. Be sober-minded, be alert. Your adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion, looking for anyone he can devour. You see, the opposite of humbling ourselves, falling on our knees and saying, Jesus, I need you, is a kind of reliance on self that causes us to look inward, that causes us to really grow anxious. I was just talking with somebody today about anxiety. Anxiety in young people is skyrocketing. Anxiety in our culture is growing. There's just a general kind of fear that really can begin to set in people's lives. Well, I think that's absolutely a serious issue that needs to be addressed. I think a lot of what's underneath that is this assumption that it's all riding on me, that everything's on my shoulders. It's a blindedness. It's a form of deception, really, that puts the weight of the world on ourselves. But the real solution to fear and to walking by faith is a simple phrase, and this is something I want you to write down or really grasp if you're taking notes. It's that we need to believe what we believe. We really need to trust what we say we believe about Jesus. Can I remind you of two important things about Jesus you need to believe? Two things you need to believe about what you believe. Number one, you need to remember that God exists. God exists. If you want to walk by faith and not by fear, you got to remember God exists. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Spencer, that's not breaking news to me. I believe God exists. But the reality is, oftentimes, functionally, the way we live like God doesn't exist. Think about when you're sick. Think about how many different things you'll do when you're sick before you ever pray. We'll call the doctor. We'll go to a pharmacy. Maybe we'll look at WebMD. We'll talk to our friends. We'll look in the mirror. We'll open our mouth and stick at our tongue. We'll do all kind of things before we ever pray. Now, I'm not saying medicine and doctors aren't good, but I'm just saying oftentimes, functionally, our default is to think it's all relying on us and to forget that God actually exists. Remember, God has a job, and you and I have a job. God's job is running the universe. Our job is being faithful to what God's called us to be and to do. So first, remember, God exists. Believe what you believe that God exists. But secondly, believe what you believe in that God rewards his people. Did you know that in Jesus, God is delighted with you? He enjoys you. He's not repulsed by you. He's not running from you when you sin or make a mistake. He's running to you. God rewards his children. He's acting on your behalf, and you are loved. If we're going to walk by fear instead of by faith, we have to believe what we believe, that there really is a God, and he exists, and he's sovereign, and God really does reward his children. He loves us. Are you walking by faith? Or are you walking by fear? As we live our lives and as we seek to fight for holiness, one of the things we want you to remember is that we are called to walk by faith, believing that God exists and God rewards us.